Beneath a dark veil, a bride's trembling hand is forced to touch an ancient wooden instrument that will silence her soul forever. Yesterday, she was a cherished daughter in a sunlit garden. Today, her body is nothing more than property to be transferred, inspected by strange men who record every breath of her humiliation. They called it tradition. History calls it an obscenity that had to be erased. But for her, she called it the night she died, so that she could live again. The heat of late summer hung over Rome like a suffocating shroud, turning the air on the Esquiline Hill into something thick and difficult to breathe. Dust from the bustling streets below rose in golden motes, coating the marble windowsills, while the distant roar of the city, the shouting merchants, the creaking cart wheels, the barking of stray dogs, sounded like a beast pacing in its cage. Inside the villa, however, the silence was heavy and absolute, broken only by the rhythmic snick-snick of a silver needle piercing taut linen. Aurelia sat by the window, catching the fading light. She was 17, a young woman with hair the color of roasted chestnuts and eyes that held a dangerous spark of intelligence. A trait her father often complained made her difficult to market. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, embroidering a scene of Diana hunting, though her mind was miles away from the forest she was stitching. She was thinking of poetry, of the verses of Catullus she had read in secret, words that spoke of passion and choice, things that did not exist in this room. The heavy oak door creaked open without a knock. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Titus, her father, stepped across the threshold. He was a man carved from the same hard stone as the city's foundations, broad-shouldered, with a face lined by years of political maneuvering, and a mouth that rarely curved into anything resembling a smile. He wore his toga with the stiffness of armor. Behind him trailed a scribe, a thin, weaselly man whose hands were stained permanently with ink, clutching a scroll as if it were a weapon. Aurelia lowered her embroidery frame but did not stand. She watched her father's eyes. They did not look at her. They looked over her, assessing her presentation, the way a farmer inspects a heifer before the market opens. "It is finished," Titus announced, his voice devoid of any warmth. He gestured to the scribe, who unrolled the parchment on the low wooden table. The sound of the dry paper unfurling was loud in the quiet room. "The negotiations with the family of Marcus Petronius have concluded. You are to marry his son, Lucius, 3 days from now." Aurelia felt the needle slip, pricking her finger. A single drop of bright red blood bloomed on the white linen, staining the goddess Diana's foot. She stared at the dot of crimson, her heart hammering a sudden, violent rhythm against her ribs. "Lucius," she whispered. She knew the name. Lucius was a man of ambition, a rising star in the courts, but he was a stranger. She had seen him perhaps twice at the games, a distant figure with a cold, handsome face. "Father, I do not know him. I have not even—" "You do not need to know him," Titus cut her off, walking to the table. He picked up a quill. "You need to bear his heirs and secure his alliance for my upcoming bid for the aedileship. That is your function." From the shadows of the corner, another figure emerged. It was Livia, Aurelia's mother. She was a woman who had once been beautiful, but decades of silence and obedience had washed the color from her spirit, leaving her pale and ghostly. She moved soundlessly, like a piece of furniture that had suddenly animated itself. Aurelia watched as her father bent over the document. It was the tabulae nuptiales, the marriage contract. But as she looked at the dense lines of Latin legal text, she realized this was not a union of souls. It was a deed of sale. The scribe dipped the quill for Titus. "The terms are set for conventio in manum," the scribe muttered, his voice dry as dust. "In manum. Into the hand." The reality of the phrase crashed down on Aurelia. Under Roman law, she was currently under the potestas, the power of her father. She was his property, to keep, to punish, or to sell. By signing this document, he was not giving her away in marriage. He was transferring the title of ownership. She would pass from the hand of the father directly into the hand of the husband. She would own nothing. She would be nothing, legally, but a daughter figure to her own husband, subject to his absolute authority over her life and death. "Father," Aurelia said, her voice trembling, rising in volume. She stood up, the embroidery hoop clattering to the floor. "Do I have no say? Am I not your flesh and blood? You are selling me like a sack of grain to a man who looks at women as if they are cattle." Titus paused. He looked up, and for the first time, he met her eyes. There was no anger in his gaze, which was almost worse. There was only the bored indifference of a merchant dealing with a noisy piece of inventory. "You are a Roman daughter, Aurelia," he said cold, signing his name with a flourish. The scratching of the nib on parchment sounded like a knife slicing through skin. "Your value is determined by the alliance you bring. Be grateful I found a buyer with a high price. It is more than you deserve." The cruelty of it, the reduction of her entire existence, her dreams, her poetry, her soul, down to a signature on a wax tablet, ignited a fire in her chest. She opened her mouth to scream, to flip the table, to tear the scroll apart. But before a sound could escape, a hand clamped firmly over her mouth. It was Livia. Her mother's hands, usually so soft and passive, were made of iron in that moment. Livia pulled Aurelia back against her chest, the smell of lavender and stale fear filling Aurelia's nose. "Hush!" Livia hissed into her ear, her voice a desperate, terrified vibration. "Do not speak, do not fight him." Aurelia struggled, tears of rage hot in her eyes, looking at her father's back as he rolled up the scroll, satisfied with his transaction. "Look at me, Aurelia," Livia whispered, turning her daughter's face with forceful hands. Aurelia looked into her mother's eyes and saw a vast, deep well of sorrow. "He does not see you. He never will. If you scream, he will beat you, and then he will send you to Lucius broken and bruised. Do not resist. Resistance only makes it hurt more. Be silent. Survive." Titus turned to leave, the scribe scurrying after him. He didn't even look back at the two women embracing in the center of the room. He had completed his business for the day. Aurelia slumped in her mother's arms, the fight draining out of her as the door clicked shut. The drop of blood on the embroidery had dried into a dark, rusty brown. The contract was signed. The sale was complete. She was no longer Aurelia, daughter of Titus. She was an asset waiting for delivery. The sun had bled out over the 7 hills, leaving behind a bruised purple twilight that signaled the beginning of the procession. The air in the street was cooling, but inside the saffron-colored veil, the flammeum, Aurelia felt as though she were burning. The fabric, thick and stifling, covered the upper half of her face, tinting the world in a sickly, jaundiced yellow. It was meant to symbolize the dawn of a new life, but to Aurelia, it felt like the shroud of the dead. She stepped out of her father's house, her feet clad in soft wool slippers that offered no protection against the uneven cobblestones. Her hair had been parted with a spear point earlier that morning, a violent little tradition meant to drive out bad spirits, and arranged into 6 heavy braids bound with wool ribbons. The weight of it pulled at her scalp, a constant dull ache that mirrored the tightness in her chest. Behind her walked a young boy, Cassius, a distant cousin serving as her torchbearer. He was no older than 10, with a round, innocent face, illuminated by the flickering pine torch he carried. He looked solemn, struggling to keep the heavy wood upright, unaware that he was leading a lamb to slaughter. "Talasio! Talasio!" The shout erupted from the gathering crowd, the traditional wedding cry that had echoed through Rome since the days of Romulus. It was supposed to be a cheer of celebration, a wish for happiness. But as the procession lurched forward, winding its way through the narrow, darkening streets towards the Esquiline, the chant mutated into something far more feral. The crowd was not made up of well-wishers. It was a mob of neighbors, idlers, and young men drunk on cheap wine, drawn by the spectacle of a patrician wedding. They pressed in close, their breath sour and hot against the cool evening air. Then the singing started. These were the Fescennine verses. Tradition dictated that obscenity was necessary to ward off the evil eye, that the gods would only allow happiness if the couple was sufficiently humbled by mockery. But as the verses grew louder, Aurelia realized this was no ritual protection. It was a sanctioned assault. "See the bride, the fresh young doe," a voice bellowed from the left. "Wide in the hips, ready to be split." Laughter rippled through the mob, sharp and jagged. "Lucius the bull is waiting in his stall," another voice sang, off-key and aggressive. "He'll plow the field until the furrow is raw." Aurelia kept her head down, staring at the dirt and refuse on the street, trying to count her steps. 1, 2, 3. She tried to recall the poetry she loved, the soft verses of Catullus, but the crude rhymes of the mob drowned them out. They described her body with grotesque anatomical precision. They speculated on her cries. They turned the private act of intimacy into a public spectator sport, stripping away her dignity layer by layer before she even reached the marriage bed. Then came the impact. Something hard struck her shoulder, followed by a sharp sting on her arm. Thwack. Thwack. Walnuts. Young men lined the edges of the procession, dipping their hands into pouches and hurling hard-shelled walnuts at her. In the ancient days, the groom threw nuts to children to symbolize leaving childish things behind. But here, the crowd threw them at the bride. They were fertility charms, they claimed, seeds for the future. But thrown with force, they felt like stones. A walnut struck her temple, right through the veil, causing a sudden flash of white light in her vision. Aurelia stumbled, gasping. "Fertile ground! Break the shell!" a young man shouted. He was leaning against a wall, his tunic stained, his eyes bright with malice. He locked eyes with her through the sheer fabric of her veil, grinning as he wound up for another throw. He wasn't warding off evil spirits. He was enjoying the power of hurting a woman who wasn't allowed to fight back. Aurelia's hand flew to her waist, clutching the cingulum, the woolen belt tied with the complex knot of Hercules. Her husband would be the only one allowed to untie it later. The knot felt like a noose around her midsection. She wanted to run. The urge was so strong it made her legs tremble. She wanted to tear off the suffocating veil, scream at the grinning man, and flee back to the safety of her embroidery and her silence. But her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Resistance only makes it hurt more. So she walked. She let the walnuts bruise her skin. She let the obscene songs pour over her like sewage. She absorbed the violence because that was what a Roman wife did. She endured. Finally, the procession rounded the corner, and the destination came into view. The house of Lucius stood imposing against the night sky. The doorway was garlanded with wool and greasy with the oil of animal fat, smeared there to promise plenty. And there, standing in the open threshold, was Lucius. He was a tall man, perhaps 30, with the hard, statuesque features of a man who spent more time with ledgers than with people. He wore his festive white toga, but his posture was one of boredom. He stood with his arms crossed, watching the chaotic, noisy procession approach, not with joy, but with the impatient expression of a man waiting for a delayed shipment of grain. He looked at the crowd screaming obscenities about his future wife's body. He looked at the young men pelting her with nuts. He did not step forward. He did not raise a hand to silence them. He did not offer a look of reassurance or protection. Aurelia stopped at the foot of the steps, her body aching, her ears ringing with the vulgar chants. She lifted her head, the saffron veil sliding slightly, and looked up at him. She searched his face for a flicker of humanity, a sign that they were partners in this madness. She found nothing. Lucius looked at her, then checked the position of the moon, calculating how much longer this ritual would take before he could claim his property and go to sleep. In his cold, indifferent stare, Aurelia realized the songs were right. The walnuts were right. There was no love here to protect her. There was only the law, and the night that was about to swallow her whole. The threshold of the house of Marcus Petronius. Rufus loomed before them, a gaping maw in the torchlight. The doorpost had been greased with wolf's fat and wound with wool, a ritual to bind luck to the house, but the grease glistened like sweat in the flickering orange glow. Lucius stopped. He turned to Aurelia, his face an unreadable mask of Roman stoicism. Without a word, he bent and scooped her up into his arms. It was not a gesture of romance. There was no tenderness in the way his arm clamped around her waist, or the way his other arm hooked beneath her knees. It was a preventative measure, a superstitious necessity. For a bride to trip over the threshold of her new home was an omen so catastrophic, it could doom a family for generations. Lucius lifted her with the grim efficiency of a dock worker, hoisting a crate of amphorae, ensuring the cargo was not damaged before delivery. Aurelia held her breath, her body stiff against the rough wool of his toga. She was suspended in the air, caught between her past and her future, belonging to neither. He stepped over the raised stone lip and set her down on the mosaic floor of the atrium. Boom! Behind them, the heavy oak doors were slammed shut by unseen slaves. The sound was final, like the closing of a tomb. The obscenities of the street, the singing mob, the crude laughter, all of it was instantly severed, replaced by a silence so profound it rang in Aurelia's ears. But the room was not empty. Aurelia adjusted her saffron veil, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had expected, perhaps naively, a moment of respite. She had expected a servant to offer her water, or perhaps her husband to finally speak a word of welcome. Instead, she found herself standing in the center of a tribunal. The atrium was vast and shadowy, lit by oil lamps that cast long, dancing shapes against the frescoed walls. Along the perimeter, high up on shelves, sat the Imagines, the wax death masks of the Petronius ancestors. Their hollow eyes seemed to stare down at her, judging the new acquisition. But it was the living eyes that froze the blood in her veins. Standing in a semicircle, arms crossed within their togas, were 7 men. They were not smiling. They were not drinking wine. They stood with the solemnity of judges at a capital trial. These were the witnesses, neighbors and clients of Lucius, legally required to be present. Their function was not to celebrate, but to testify. They were here to ensure that the transfer of ownership was conducted according to the strict letter of Roman law. To the left stood a man Aurelia had not seen before. He was older, balding, with hands that looked scrubbed raw. He was arranging metal instruments on a small folding table. He was Eudoxus, the physician. The faint clink of a bronze probe hitting a metal tray echoed sharply in the silent room. And directly in front of Aurelia stood the woman who would orchestrate the night. She was tall and severe, draped in the stola of a matron who had borne 3 living children and buried a husband. The requirements for a pronoba, the matron of honor. Her name was Domitia, an aunt of Lucius. Her face was a landscape of sharp lines and uncompromising discipline, devoid of any maternal warmth. Lucius stepped away from Aurelia, joining the line of 7 men. He turned to face her, becoming just another spectator. Aurelia stood alone in the center of the mosaic floor, the target of 10 pairs of eyes. A sudden, terrifying clarity washed over her. She remembered her father's lessons on property law. When a man bought a vineyard, he did not simply hand over the coin. He walked the boundaries with witnesses. He inspected the vines. He tested the soil. The transaction had to be verified, visible, and indisputable so that no one could later claim the sale was invalid. She was the vineyard, and the inspection was about to begin. Domitia, the pronuba, stepped forward. She moved with a gliding, predatory grace. She reached out and took Aurelia's wrist. Her grip was shocking. Not a gentle guide, but a clamp of iron, cold and unyielding. It was the grip of a jailer. "Welcome to the house of your husband," Domitia said. Her voice was low, raspy, and stripped of all sentiment. "The contract is signed, but the law requires proof. We do not deal in secrets here, girl. We deal in certainty." Aurelia tried to pull her hand back, a reflexive instinct, but Domitia tightened her hold, digging her nails into the soft flesh of Aurelia's wrist. "Do not flinch," Domitia hissed, leaning in close so that her breath, smelling of mint and old wine, washed over Aurelia's face. "Every bride before you has done this. Every matron you see in the forum has stood where you stand. You are not a person tonight, Aurelia. You are a vessel to be verified." Domitia gestured to the physician, then to the waiting men. "The witnesses are ready," Domitia announced to the room, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "The rites of verification must proceed. Let no man say this union was not consummated by the book." Aurelia looked at Lucius. He was staring at the wall just above her head, refusing to meet her gaze. The physician picked up a cold metal speculum, wiping it with a cloth. The 7 witnesses shifted their weight, leaning forward slightly, their eyes locked on her body. The walls of the atrium seemed to close in. The air grew thin. Aurelia realized with a jolt of pure horror that the door behind her was bolted, and there was no corner of this room, no shadow, no fold of her veil that would protect her from their scrutiny. Her privacy had been left on the street outside, along with the walnut shells and the dust. The corner of the atrium was shrouded in deeper shadow than the rest of the room. A deliberate darkness that felt heavy with the dust of centuries. Domitia's grip on Aurelia's wrist did not loosen as she dragged the girl away from the center of the mosaic floor. Aurelia's bare feet slapped against the cold stone, a pathetic, frantic sound in the stillness. They stopped before a tall object draped in heavy, unbleached linen. It stood like a silent sentinel, roughly the height of a man's waist. The 7 witnesses shuffled closer, their sandals scraping on the floor, forming a tight, suffocating semicircle around them. They knew what lay beneath. They had all seen this before, perhaps dozens of times. To them, it was as mundane as a sacrifice at the temple. To Aurelia, the shape beneath the cloth pulsed with a terrifying malice. "The law demands a woman belong to her husband," Domitia recited, her voice a dry rasp. "But before she belongs to a man, she must seek the blessing of the roots of life. She must be opened by the god, so the path is clear for the master." With a sharp snap of her wrist, Domitia pulled the linen away. Aurelia's breath hitched in her throat, strangling a scream. It was Mutinus Tutinus. It was not a statue in the artistic sense. There was no face, no torso, no limbs to suggest a human form. It was a crude, ancient thing carved from dark, polished olive wood. A single, massive pillar, shaped with grotesque, anatomical precision into a phallus. It was huge, exaggerated, and terrifyingly functional. The wood shone with the oil of countless rituals, dark and slick in the lamplight. Aurelia recoiled, backing away until she hit the chest of one of the witnesses. The man pushed her firmly back toward the object. "This is the guardian of the marriage bed," Domitia said, positioning herself behind Aurelia. "He breaks the seal of the terrified virgin. He takes the shame so the husband need not face resistance. You will sit, Aurelia. You will embrace the god. You will offer your first blood to him." The horror of it washed over Aurelia like ice water. She had heard whispers of this, old wives' tales meant to frighten young girls, but she had never believed it was real. St. Augustine would later write of this practice with holy outrage, describing how Roman brides were compelled to mount the wooden idol. But this was not history or theology. This was now. "No," Aurelia whispered, shaking her head. "Please, I cannot." "You will," Domitia hissed, her hands clamping onto Aurelia's waist. "It is the custom. It is the only way to ensure fertility. Do you want to be barren? Do you want to bring a curse upon Lucius's house?" "I don't care about the curse," Aurelia cried out, twisting in the older woman's grip. She looked frantically toward the circle of men. "Lucius! Lucius, stop them! Look at this! It is monstrous!" Lucius stood near the physician's table. He looked at the wooden monstrosity, then at his young wife, whose face was wet with tears, her eyes wide with pleading. For a second, just a heartbeat, his mask slipped. His jaw tightened. A flicker of genuine disgust passed through his eyes, a recognition that this was not a holy rite but a degradation, a relic of a savage past that civilized men should have abandoned. He opened his mouth as if to speak. The air in the room seemed to hang suspended. Then, one of the older witnesses, a senator with a face like a dried apple, cleared his throat loudly. "Proceed, Pronuba. The night grows late. The pressure of society, the weight of tradition, the fear of looking weak before his peers. It crushed the spark of humanity in Lucius instantly." He closed his mouth, looked at the floor, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The betrayal hit Aurelia harder than any blow. He would not save her. Domitia wasted no more time. She shoved Aurelia downward. "Sit," she commanded. "Do not shame us." The ritual that followed was a blur of nightmare and sensation. Forced by Domitia's relentless hands, Aurelia was made to hike up her tunic. The wood was cold against her skin, hard and unyielding. The purpose of Mutinus Tutinus became horrifyingly clear. It was not just symbolic. It was a tool of psychological breaking. It was designed to force the body to accept intrusion, to tear away the sanctity of one's own skin in front of an audience, so that whatever happened later in the marriage bed would seem like a mercy by comparison. Aurelia squeezed her eyes shut, biting her lip until she tasted copper. Tears leaked from her eyes, hot and humiliating. She could hear the heavy breathing of the men around her, the rustle of their clothes as they leaned in to watch the blessing. She felt the Pronuba's hands guiding her, forcing the contact, pressing her down until she gasped in pain. It was a violation of the soul. In that moment, the girl who loved poetry, the girl who dreamed of tenderness, died. The wood did not just touch her body, it splintered her spirit. "It is done," Domitia announced, pulling Aurelia up roughly. The older woman adjusted Aurelia's dress with brisk, impersonal efficiency. "The god has accepted. The vessel is prepared." Aurelia stood trembling, her legs barely holding her weight. She felt dirty, hollowed out. She looked at the wooden figure, now standing innocent and inanimate in the corner. And then she looked at Lucius. He was pale. He could not look at the statue. He could not look at her. The room was silent again, save for the soft weeping that Aurelia could not suppress. But the silence was different now. It was not the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of complicity. They had all watched. They had all participated in breaking her, and in doing so, they had bound her to them in a pact of shared shame. Domitia turned to the physician. "The god has done his part. Now, Eudoxus, verify the result." The wooden god stood silent in the corner, its dark surface gleaming in the lamplight, indifferent to the devastation it had caused. Aurelia leaned against the cold plaster of the wall, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Her body felt foreign to her now, a landscape scorched by shame, throbbing with a dull ache that radiated from her very core. She wanted to collapse, to curl into a ball on the mosaic floor and weep until the earth swallowed her whole. But Domitia's hand was still on her shoulder, a heavy anchoring weight that forbade collapse. "Stand up straight," the pronuba commanded, though her voice had lost some of its ritualistic fervor, replaced by the flat tone of a supervisor moving to the next task on a list. "We are not finished. The god has opened the way. Now, science must confirm the vessel is sound." From the shadows, Eudoxus the physician stepped forward. In the flickering light, he looked less like a healer and more like a butcher inspecting a carcass. He wore a leather apron over his tunic, stained with the faint dark remnants of previous surgeries. He did not look at Aurelia's face. To him, her tear-streaked cheeks and the terror in her eyes were irrelevant data points. His focus was entirely lower. He placed his folding table closer to the light. With a terrifying deliberation, he began to lay out his tools. Clink, clink, scrape. The sounds were sharp and precise, cutting through the heavy silence of the atrium. There was a bronze speculum, its screws greased for expansion, a set of slender probes, and a small sponge soaked in vinegar and water. "Bring the lamp closer," Eudoxus ordered a slave, his voice dry and cracking like parchment. Lucius stood frozen near the witnesses. He looked pale, a sheen of sweat on his upper lip, but he did not look away. He could not. Roman law was explicit. If he wanted his future children to be legitimate heirs, if he wanted Aurelia's dowry to be securely his, the bride's virginal status and her physical capacity to bear children had to be documented. This was not a medical checkup, it was a property survey. "Position her," Eudoxus said, lifting a probe. Domitia and 2 female slaves moved in. They handled Aurelia not with malice, but with a terrifying efficiency, positioning her legs, adjusting the lamp so the light fell harshly, unforgivingly, on the most private parts of her anatomy. Aurelia squeezed her eyes shut. "I'm not here," she told herself desperately. "I am in the garden. I am reading Virgil. I am anywhere but here." But the sensation of cold metal shattered her dissociation. She gasped, a sharp, involuntary sound, as the physician began his work. There was no gentleness, no bedside manner. Eudoxus worked with the detachment of a surveyor testing the soil of a new field. He was checking for obstructions, confirming the physical changes wrought by the wooden statue, and verifying the integrity of the flesh that Lucius had purchased. "Hymenal ring, distended but present," Eudoxus muttered, his voice loud enough for the scribe standing in the corner to hear. The scribe's stylus scratched furiously against a wax tablet, recording the details of her anatomy for the legal archives. "No polyps visible. Pelvic structure, adequate for childbirth." Every word felt like a lash. Aurelia was being dismantled, categorized, and recorded. The 7 witnesses leaned in, some craning their necks to see, their faces grave and attentive. They were not leering like the mob in the street. Their violation was far more sophisticated. They were reducing her humanity to a biological function. To them, she was a broodmare, a vessel, a field to be plowed and sown. Her pain was merely the breaking of the soil. "Widen," Eudoxus commanded. The cold metal expanded inside her. The pain was sharp, a tearing sensation that made her knees buckle, but the slaves held her upright. Aurelia looked up, her vision blurring. She saw the Imagines, the death masks of Lucius's ancestors, staring down from the shelves. They seemed to mock her. "We endured this," they seemed to whisper. "Our wives endured this. Who are you to demand dignity?" She looked at Lucius. He was watching the physician's hands, his expression a mixture of fascination and nausea. He was the owner inspecting the engine of his new acquisition. He was complicit in every second of this torture. The ritual with the god was effective, Eudoxus announced, withdrawing the instrument with a wet, sucking sound that made Aurelia's stomach turn. He wiped the metal on a rag. The resistance is broken. She is patent. She is ready for the husband. He turned to the witnesses. I certify that this woman is intact save for the ritual opening. She is free of disease and defect. The contract is valid. Valid, the 7 men murmured in unison, a chorus of gray-haired judges sealing her fate. The shame was a physical weight, heavier than the wooden statue, heavier than the stones of Rome. Aurelia felt a scream building in her throat, a primal animal shriek of rage and agony. She wanted to scream that she was a person, that she had thoughts and dreams, that she was not just a collection of holes and organs to be measured. But she remembered her mother's warning. Resistance makes it worse. If she screamed, they would only restrain her tighter. They would call her hysterical, perhaps even defective. So she bit down. She clamped her teeth onto her lower lip, hard. She bit until the skin broke, until the salty tang of blood filled her mouth. She focused all her agony, all her hatred, into that single point of pain. A thin trickle of crimson ran down her chin, dripping onto the pristine white of her wedding tunic. "Clean her up," Domitian said, noticing the blood, but misinterpreting its source. "And take her to the bed. The final act remains." Eudoxus packed his bag, the clink-clink of metal signaling the end of his survey. He wiped his hands, leaving Aurelia standing shivering, exposed, and officially certified as a functional piece of property. The scribe finished his writing, blowing the excess wax dust from the tablet. Aurelia stared at the floor, at the drop of blood from her lip that mingled with the dust. It was the only part of her that was still her own. The walk from the atrium to the cubiculum was short, yet it felt like crossing a desert. Aurelia moved mechanically, her legs numb, guided by the firm, unrelenting hand of Domitian. The physician had packed his tools, the scribe had sealed his wax tablet, and now only the final clause of the contract remained to be executed. The bedroom had been prepared with a festive cruelty. Garlands of myrtle and ivy hung from the ceiling, their sweet scent cloying in the stagnant air. The marriage bed, the lectus genialis, stood in the center of the room, high and imposing, draped in coverlets of purple wool. It looked less like a place of rest and more like a sacrificial altar waiting for the offering. Aurelia sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands rested in her lap, motionless. She stared at the opposite wall, refusing to look at the doorway, because the door was not closed. In the corridor, the shadows of the 7 witnesses stretched long and distorted against the plaster walls. They had not left. They would not leave until the deed was done. The law of Rome was absolute. A marriage unconsummated was a marriage that could be annulled. To ensure the validity of the property transfer, the act required proximity. It required auditory confirmation. Domitian took her position just outside the threshold, her arms crossed, her silhouette cutting into the light of the room like a jagged scar. She was the gatekeeper, the auditor of the flesh. "The bride is placed," Domitian announced to the unseen men in the hall. "The room is prepared. Enter Lucius Petronius." Lucius appeared in the doorway. He had shed his toga, wearing only a simple white tunic. Without the heavy folds of the formal garment, he looked smaller, less like a master of Rome and more like a man drafted into a war he did not understand. He paused at the threshold, his hand resting on the doorframe, his knuckles white. He looked at Domitian, perhaps hoping for a nod of dismissal, a moment of privacy. But the pronuba stood like a statue of Nemesis. She gestured with her chin toward the bed. "Perform." Lucius stepped inside. He did not look at Aurelia's face. He moved with the stiff, jerky motions of a marionette whose strings were being pulled by the invisible hands of ancestors and laws. He blew out the lamp on the bedside table, plunging the room into a semi-darkness, illuminated only by the light spilling in from the hallway where the audience waited. He sat beside her. The mattress dipped under his weight. Aurelia flinched, a small involuntary spasm, but she did not pull away. She had no place left to retreat. "Lie back," Lucius said. His voice was flat, hollow. It was not a command born of desire. It was the reading of a script. Aurelia obeyed. She lay back against the pillows, her eyes fixing on a crack in the ceiling plaster. She decided then that she would become stone. Stone does not feel. Stone does not weep. Stone endures the chisel and the hammer without complaint. What followed was the grim bureaucracy of intimacy. There was no romance, no tentative exploration. Lucius moved with the efficiency of a soldier following orders, a grim determination to finish the task so he could retreat from the shame of the situation. He was rough not out of malice, but out of haste. Every movement was performative, designed to be audible to the listeners outside, to prove his virility, to prove his ownership. Aurelia bit the inside of her cheek, focusing on the metallic taste of blood to drown out the reality of her body being used. She was a vessel. She was a field. She was a contract being stamped. Then, amidst the friction and the heavy silence, Lucius paused. His face was close to hers, shielded from the view of the door by the angle of his body. For the first time that night, he looked her in the eye. His expression was shattered, a mask of guilt and self-loathing that mirrored her own despair. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear, not in a kiss, but in a secret confession. "Forgive me," he whispered, the sound barely a breath. "It is the only way." The apology hung in the air, fragile and pathetic. It did not stop him. It did not save her. In fact, it cut deeper than his indifference. It acknowledged that he knew this was wrong, that he knew he was breaking her, and yet he possessed neither the courage nor the power to stop it. He was a slave to the system just as she was, only his chains were made of pride and hers were made of iron. He finished. He pulled away, breathless and sweating, and sat up on the edge of the bed. "It is done!" Domitia's voice rang out from the doorway, triumphant and sharp. "The union is sealed, witnessed and verified." A murmur of approval rippled through the men in the hallway. A few clapped Lucius on the shoulder as he stood up, arranging his tunic. He did not smile. He walked past them, head bowed, disappearing into the shadows of his own house like a ghost. And then, the final indignity began. Before Aurelia could even pull the coverlet over her shivering body, before she could process the violation, the mundane world crashed back in. Slaves bustled into the corridor, carrying basins of water and fresh linens. They chatted in low voices about the lateness of the hour, about the wine left over in the atrium. The sounds were casual, domestic. The scrape of a basin against the floor, the wringing of a cloth, the yawning of a tired servant. It was the sound of a surgical theater being cleaned after an operation. The patient was stitched up, the tumor removed, the organs rearranged. Now it was time to mop the floor. Aurelia turned onto her side, pulling her knees to her chest. She faced the cold plaster wall. She heard the water splashing in the basin nearby, cleansing the evidence of the night. She closed her eyes. The apology whispered in the dark, faded, drowned out by the noise of a world that did not care. She did not cry. The girl who cried had been left in the atrium with the wooden god. The woman lying in the bed was something else entirely. Something cold, something silent, something that would never break because it had already been ground to dust. 15 winters had turned the soft clay of Aurelia's youth into hard, impenetrable porcelain. She sat in the peristyle garden, the morning sun filtering through the colonnade. On the table before her lay the household ledgers. Her fingers, once prone to trembling over embroidery, now moved with the swift, ruthless calculation of a banker. She managed the Petronius estate better than any steward. Under her watch, the olive groves in the south had doubled their yield, and the debts Lucius had inherited were wiped clean. She was 32 years old now. The saffron veil was a distant memory, replaced by the dignified stola of a Roman matron. Her face was still beautiful, but it was the beauty of a marble bust, smooth, pale, and entirely composed. Across the garden, near the fountain, sat Flavia. At 14, Flavia was everything Aurelia had been before the wooden god broke her spirit. She was laughter and sunlight, with hair that curled unruly in the damp air, and eyes that looked at the world with dangerous curiosity. Flavia was reading a scroll of Greek philosophy, a text by Epictetus that spoke of the freedom of the will, ideas that were becoming fashionable in Rome, whispering that even slaves and women possessed souls that could not be owned. Aurelia watched her daughter, a fierce protectiveness coiling in her gut like a sleeping viper. Lucius entered the garden. Time had been heavier on him than on her. His hair was silver at the temples, and his shoulders carried a permanent slump, the posture of a man crushed by the weight of his own conscience. Their marriage had evolved into a quiet, functional truce. They rarely spoke of the past. They shared a bed, but the intimacy was sparse and mechanical, performed in the dark. Yet in the daylight, there was a strange, silent partnership. Lucius deferred to her judgment on all matters of the house. He looked at her sometimes with a mixture of awe and terrified guilt, knowing he lived with a woman he had allowed to be destroyed. "The meeting with the Valerius family is concluded," Lucius said, sinking onto a stone bench. He did not look at Flavia. He looked at his hands. Aurelia set down her stylus. "And? Does the senator accept the dowry?" "He accepts," Lucius said. His voice was tight, a wire stretched to breaking. "Senator Valerius is old, Aurelia. He is of the ancient blood, a man who believes the empire is rotting because we have forgotten the old gods." Aurelia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Senator Valerius was a relic, a man of 60 who railed against the softness of modern Rome. "He wishes to marry Flavia in 2 weeks, Lucius continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But he has conditions. He claims that modern brides are loose, that their virtue is assumed rather than proven. He insists on a marriage confariatio, in its strictest, most archaic form." Aurelia went very still. "What are you saying, Lucius?" "He demands the full rites of verification," Lucius said, finally looking up. His eyes were haunted, swimming with the memory of a torchlit atrium 15 years ago. "He brings his own priest. He brings his own witnesses. He brings the statue." The silence in the garden was absolute. The splashing of the fountain sounded like crashing waves. "The statue," Aurelia repeated. The word tasted like ash. "He wants to ensure the line is pure," Lucius said, his voice cracking. "He wants to witness the breaking of the resistance himself. He says it is the only way to honor the ancestors." Across the garden, Flavia laughed at something in her scroll, the sound bright and clear like a silver bell. She had no idea that her father had just signed a warrant for her torture. Aurelia looked at her husband. For 15 years, she had been the perfect Roman wife. She had been silent. She had endured the shame, the invasive examinations of childbirth, the quiet indignity of being property. She had swallowed her rage until she thought it had digested itself. But looking at Flavia, so full of life, so untouched by the darkness of the atrium, Aurelia felt something snap. It was not a breaking, it was the sound of a lock clicking open. "You said yes," Aurelia stated. "It wasn't a question." "I had no choice," Lucius pleaded, his weakness on full display. "Valerius is powerful. If I refuse, he will ruin us. He will block my trade routes. He will shame our name in the Senate. He questioned my authority, Aurelia. He asked if I was master of my own house. So you sold her, Aurelia said. Her voice was not loud. It was terrifyingly calm. To save your trade routes, you will let an old man and his friends strip her, mount her on a piece of wood, and pry her open with cold metal while you stand and watch. Lucius flinched as if she had struck him. It is the law. It is tradition. We survived it, Aurelia. She will survive it too. Women endure. That is what you do. Aurelia stood up. She smoothed the folds of her stola. She looked at the man she had been tethered to for half her life, and she saw him for what he truly was. Not a monster, but something smaller. A coward who would feed his own child to the wolf, rather than face its teeth himself. She looked back at Flavia. Her daughter was now chasing a butterfly, her sandals slapping against the stone. Women endure. That was the lie they told to keep them quiet. That was the poison they fed them with their mother's milk. Aurelia remembered the cold wood of Mutinus Tutinus. She remembered the smell of the doctor's leather apron. She remembered the death of the girl who loved poetry. No, the thought was simple, absolute, and sharp as a dagger. You are right, Lucius, Aurelia said softly. Tradition must be served. Lucius let out a breath, relieved, mistaking her icy calm for submission. I knew you would understand. I will tell the slaves to prepare the guest quarters for the senator's arrival. He stood up and walked back toward the house, his step lighter now that he had shared the burden. Aurelia remained in the garden. She watched her husband's retreating back, and for the first time in 15 years, her eyes were dry, but her heart was burning. The Stoic philosophers were right about one thing. A human being could not be owned if their will remained free. She walked over to Flavia. The girl looked up, smiling, marking her place in the scroll. Mother, Flavia asked, is everything well? Aurelia reached out and brushed a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. Her touch was fierce, possessive. Yes, my love, Aurelia lied, her voice steady as stone. Everything is going to change. The history of pain, written in blood and silence for generations of Roman women, had come to its final page. Aurelia would not let Flavia inherit the darkness. If the law required a sacrifice, Aurelia would provide one, but it would not be her daughter. The eve of the wedding was not silent. The house of Petronius groaned under the weight of preparation. In the kitchens, slaves were already baking the honey cakes. In the atrium, the garlands of laurel and myrtle were being hung, turning the house into a verdant cage. Lucius sat in his private tablinum, the study where he conducted his business. One oil lamp burned low on his desk, illuminating the two documents before him. One was the tabulae nuptialis for Senator Valerius, a heavy, wax-sealed death sentence for his daughter's spirit. The door opened. Aurelia entered. She did not knock. She did not bow. She wore a dark cloak over her stola, and her face was illuminated by a terrifying, cold resolve. She looked like a fury from the underworld, risen to claim a debt. It is time to choose Lucius, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the room like the crack of a whip. Lucius rubbed his temples. The contracts are drawn, Aurelia. The guests arrive at dawn. Valerius has already sent his priest to inspect the preparations. Burn them, Aurelia commanded. She stepped forward, placing a hand flat on his desk. Burn the contracts, or I swear by the infernal gods, I will burn this house down with us inside it. I will scream the truth of your cowardice in the forum. I will tear down the facade you have built for 20 years until there is nothing left but ash. Lucius looked up at her. He saw the girl he had failed 15 years ago, now hardened into a weapon. He saw the hatred, yes, but beneath it, he saw a desperate, clawing love for their child. Valerius will ruin me, Lucius whispered, his voice trembling. He will strip me of my rank. We will be pariahs, We will die poor and forgotten. Better to die poor than to live as monsters, Aurelia countered. She reached into her cloak and pulled out a scroll. I have prepared this. It is a manum missio, an emancipation order, and a transfer of guardianship to your cousin in Massilia. Massilia, Gaul. It was a city of Greek learning, far from the suffocating traditions of old Rome. Flavia leaves tonight, Aurelia continued. Cassius is waiting at the rear gate with horses. A ship leaves Ostia for Gaul at first light. By the time Valerius arrives here demanding his property, she will be on the open sea. Lucius stared at the scroll. His hand shook as he reached for his stylus. He looked at the wax tablet destined for Valerius, the path of safety, of honor, of cruelty. Then he looked at the scroll, the path of ruin, of scandal, of love. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw the wooden god. He heard Aurelia's weeping from that night so long ago. He heard the silence that had filled his house ever since. I cannot save you, Aurelia, he said softly. If I do this, Rome will destroy us. Let them, she said. Lucius took the stylus. With a swift, jagged motion, he slashed through the wax of Valerius's contract, ruining it. Then, dipping his quill in ink, he signed the emancipation order. He was crying. Silent, hot tears that tracked through the lines on his face. He had finally stepped out of the shadow of his ancestors. An hour later, in the shadows of the servants' entrance, the goodbye was brief. Flavia wore a boy's tunic and a heavy hooded cloak. Beside her stood Cassius, once the child torchbearer at Aurelia's wedding, now a grown man, loyal only to the mistress who had treated him with kindness. He nodded to Aurelia, a silent vow to protect the girl with his life. Mother, Flavia whispered, clutching Aurelia's hands. Come with us. I cannot, Aurelia said, smoothing her daughter's hair. If I leave, they will hunt you. I must stay to face the storm. I must be the distraction. But what will they do to you? Nothing that can hurt me anymore, Aurelia smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had worn in years. Go to Massilia, read your books, walk in the sun, and never ever let a man own you. She kissed Flavia's forehead. Go. The horses' hoofs were muffled with rags. They slipped away into the dark arteries of Rome, disappearing toward the river and the sea. Aurelia watched until the shadows swallowed them. Her daughter was free. The chain was broken. Aurelia turned and walked back into the house. She did not go to her room. She went to the storeroom off the atrium. There, resting on a pallet, waiting for the morning ceremony, was the object. Mutinus Tutinus. The wooden god gleamed in the light of her lamp. It was heavy, carved from ancient olive wood, seasoned by centuries of oil and the terror of virgins. It looked smug. It looked eternal. Aurelia set the lamp down. She grabbed the statue with both hands. It was heavy, but her rage gave her the strength of a titan. She dragged it across the mosaic floor, the wood screeching against the stone, a sound like a dying animal. She dragged it into the tablinum, where Lucius sat waiting in the dark. He looked up as she hauled the monstrosity into the room. The hearth was cold, but a large bronze brazier burned brightly, meant to warm the room against the night chill. Aurelia did not speak. She lifted the wooden phallus, gritting her teeth against the weight, and shoved the head of the statue into the coals. The olive wood, soaked in oil for generations, caught fire almost instantly. A hiss filled the room. A black, acrid smoke curled up toward the ceiling. The wood popped and cracked. The polished surface blistered, bubbling away to reveal the rot beneath. The god was burning. Lucius stood up. He walked over to where Aurelia stood watching the flames. The heat was intense, singing their eyebrows, but neither moved. They will be here in a few hours, Lucius said. His voice was steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by a strange, hollow peace. "Let them come," Aurelia said. "Let them find us amidst the ashes." Lucius reached out. His hand, which had once signed her life away, which had once failed to protect her, now sought hers. Aurelia hesitated, then let him take it. His grip was firm. Not the grip of a master, but the grip of a shipwreck survivor clinging to another. They sat on the floor before the brazier, hand in hand, watching the symbol of their civilization turn to charcoal. The face of the wooden god blackened and crumbled. The history of pain dissolved into smoke, drifting out the window to be scattered by the wind over the 7 hills. Outside, the first gray light of dawn touched the sky. But inside, the fire burned bright, and for the first time in her life, Aurelia was not afraid of the morning. The story of Aurelia and Flavia is not merely an ancient Roman chronicle. It is a stark reminder for us today. Sometimes the things we call tradition, prejudice, or social pressure are simply gilded cages that imprison human happiness. Endurance is not always a virtue. Sometimes silence is the cruelest form of complicity. True courage is not found in drawing a sword for battle, but in daring to stand up and say no to wrongs that have existed for 1,000 years. It is the courage to sever the chains of past pain, so that the next generation need not inherit the tears of the last. Remember, you cannot change the history that has passed, but you can rewrite the future with a single brave decision made today. If Aurelia's fire in the night has warmed or moved your heart, please do not keep it to yourself. Hit the like button and share this video so the truth about these forgotten women can spread. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, for there are still many dark secrets of history waiting for us to bring into the light together. May the Almighty grant you and your family true peace. May you always possess the wisdom to discern right from wrong, and the courage to shelter and protect those you love through all the storms of life. If you believe that love can conquer all prejudices and chains, please type Amen in the comments below so we may pray for one another. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next story.